So hello, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Jill Burcum, an editorial writer with the Minneapolis Star Tribune newspaper. With me is Dr. Gregory Poland of the Mayo Clinic, and it is always nice to see you, Dr. Poland. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jill. Good to be with you.
Dr. Poland is a highly distinguished vaccine expert and leads the Rochester, Minnesota Medical Center's Vaccine Research Group. And I am grateful he's here to help the newspaper editorial board kick off a new series called Our Best Shot. Its launch comes as the global vaccination campaign is underway to end the COVID-19 pandemic. The series will tackle questions and concerns that may leave some sitting on the fence when it comes to vaccination, or even deterring people from getting it altogether. The focus today is vaccine side effects, which have been in the news recently. Fever and fatigue can reportedly hit hard after the second Pfizer or Moderna vaccination. Concerns have also been addressed recently about a link between the AstraZeneca vaccine and blood clots. Dr. Poland, you followed clinical trials closely. And while we were getting ready to do this video, you mentioned that this is the hardest, that you understand why people have questions about this particular vaccine more than others. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, Jill, I absolutely do. Throughout this interview and every interview I do, I want to be as transparent as possible. It's important for everybody to know that I give advice, paid advice, to all of those vaccine manufacturers. So I want people to know that. What's hard about this one, and I absolutely understand people questioning the vaccine. This is a new vaccine in a new format in the context of a frightening pandemic where we're having to make decisions very rapidly, because no matter what we do here, there's some irreducible level of risk. There's the risk of a vaccine and the benefit associated with it. And as we'll talk about, what I think is the much higher risk of the disease with no benefit to getting that disease.
Well said. So I'm going to jump right into questions about vaccine side effects. Again, you followed the clinical trials closely. What does this body of research tell us about what side effects to expect and how likely they are to be mild, moderate, or severe?
Yeah. Let me first start off and say that there's quite a spectrum. All of my laboratory has been immunized. A few of us had a sore arm. The rest, virtually no side effect. But let me describe mine, again, in the interest of full transparency. I developed a fever to 101. I had about 4 hours of shaking chills. I had a pretty bad headache, severe fatigue. I took a Tylenol, went to bed, woke up the next morning, and I was probably 85% better, and by the middle of the afternoon, fine. So I was at one end of that scale. That's about as bad as most people have of these temporary, though at least for a day or so, life-interrupting symptoms, all the way down to people having little or no symptoms. Now, in all three of the vaccines used here in the US, those symptoms are more common in younger people than in people my age, 65 and older. And it probably relates to the fact that, their immune systems are Corvettes, and us older guys, our immune systems are, Volkswagens or something.
That's well said. So what are most people likely to feel after they get the vaccine? Is it somewhere between what you just described?
Between those two ends of the spectrum. So, what would be a very common thing? A sore arm. That's sore enough for me that I didn't want my wife to touch it and I didn't want to sleep on it for a day. Maybe a low-grade headache. Low-grade fever is really pretty common, particularly after the second dose. Maybe some low-grade fatigue. I would say most people are fine to go to work. There's probably a low a high single digit to low double digit percentage that, yeah, I just don't feel right. I'm not going to go to work today. And then they're fine the next day. In terms of chronic symptomatology, in other words, are people getting a vaccine and are we aware of chronic side effects? No, we're not. The most dangerous side effect is what's called anaphylaxis. Okay. This is where people develop an acute, severe allergy type reaction that, if untreated, could be lethal. It is extremely easily treated if they get epinephrine. A number of them carry EpiPens. This is happening at about the same frequency as all the vaccines that we give, about 2.5 to 4.5 times per million doses given. 90+% of them are happening in women, not men. And the majority of those in women who already know they have severe allergies and maybe even a history of anaphylaxis.
How soon would a severe side effect like this happen after getting the shot?
So that's a great question, a very practical question, Jill, and I've got a good answer for you, because this is one area that's been very well studied. On average, that side effect happens within 7 to 10 minutes. So it's something that happens right away. And again, in people generally who have a history of these types of allergies. We ask people to stay for at least a half hour to capture anything like that that would happen so that we can promptly deal with it. I have to say, while we haven't given 1 million doses of vaccine yet, we're just not seeing this with any frequency any more common than we see with other routine vaccines than we give.
And if you go to a vaccine center, whether it's a pharmacy or a publicly run site or a medical provider like Mayo Clinic, they are prepared, even though this is rare, to treat someone who would have this particular issue.
Yeah, absolutely, Jill. In fact, you cannot be a vaccination center without having the right people, the right material, the right assets on site to deal with that.
Okay. Well, I'm going to take you back to the other end of the spectrum, the milder side effects. And even though they're considered mild, people are going to feel tired and achy. Is it unusual or alarming that the COVID shot would make people feel this way? Do other shots, for example, have a particular after effect like this as well?
Yeah, it's actually very common, and there are the local side effects: the sore arm, the swelling, the redness, and then there's what we call the systemic side effects: the fatigue, the headache, the fever kind of thing. Those are all transient, meaning they don't last very long. Most of the time require no treatment. Some people don't do it beforehand, after getting the vaccine, might take a Tylenol or an Aleve or something like that. Rare is the person that has this last more than day and a half, maybe 2 days at max. And as I say, spontaneously disappears. It is not evidence of something going wrong. What it says is that your immune system is in Zoom mode. I mean, it really sees this and reacts to that. And more than likely, you're really making a good immune response. The other side of the coin is not true. The fact that you might not have much in the way of any side effect does not mean that you're not making antibody. But we do see this difference. It's different by gender, by age, and by time frame.
It sounds like most people who get the shot, if they do feel tired or achy, they will be able to deal with it at home through rest and maybe over-the-counter pain relief.
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely, yes. And then one other thing to mention, Jill, a lot of people are being pressed into service to give vaccines. I don't say this to scare anybody, but I like any of my patients to be fully informed. We do see some patients referred to us that have gotten the injection too high, actually into the shoulder or in too much to either side. The vaccine should be given about 2 to 3 finger breaths below the edge of the shoulder, right into the middle of that deltoid muscle, not in front, not in back, not too high and not too low. Otherwise, administering it wrong can lead to side effects that you needn't have.
And I would guess that would involve maybe arm or joint pain.
Exactly.
Okay. Are there more side effects reported for one of the 3 vaccines that are currently authorized for use in the United States?
Yes, I would say the 2 mRNA vaccines, Moderna and Pfizer, are more reactogenic than the Johnson & Johnson, sometimes called Janssen, vaccine. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is 1 dose. The mRNA vaccines are 2 doses. They might be a little more effective in some of the milder cases. They're equally effective against severe disease, death, and hospitalization. But for some people, the advantage of a little less reactogenicity, 1 and done, just 1 dose, is a plus to them. Other people feel, okay, if I got 3% or 5% more benefit from 2 doses, I'm going to do that.
If you were given a choice of which vaccine to get, is there one that you would choose, or are you fine with taking any of the 3?
In the context of a pandemic, I would say to people, and I've said it to members of my own family, take whatever vaccine is available to you. It's more important that you get vaccinated than try to trade off fine little differences.
Have there been more adverse effects reported for the COVID vaccines than for others, such as routine childhood immunizations or the annual flu shot that are already in use?
Yeah, definitely more than the flu shot. For the vast majority of us, I get a flu shot every year of my adult life. I might have a tiny bit of soreness and nothing else at all. Tetanus shot every 10 years, I get some soreness, maybe don't feel great for half a day or something like that. This is more equivalent. Some of our listeners and readers may have gotten the shingles vaccine. This is more like the shingles vaccine, little more reactogenic.
And reactogenic, you mean?
Side effects.
Okay.
Yeah. Reactivity.
Okay. Well, we've been talking mostly about short-term side effects. Some people are concerned about long-term risks. What would you tell people who are reluctant to get the vaccine because they're concerned that we don't know enough yet about those long-term side effects or the potential for those?
Yeah. I think this is a question that people deserve a clear answer on. I really do. And so I'm going to try to give you a very transparent answer. On the one hand, we don't know what we don't know, right? We have a little over 1 year experience with this virus, so we're learning a lot. People have seen that in terms of what have we learned about masks or distance or travel. On the other hand, these are vaccines. I know a lot of people think they were just developed. Well, the mRNA vaccines were developed 31 years ago. They hadn't yet made it into clinical practice because there really was no reason yet to introduce those. I think we're going to see them more and more commonly, but they're not brand new vaccines. We actually have some research experience with these. Side effects to vaccines generally occur within minutes to days, maybe weeks, with 3 exceptions. You can see about 1 case of Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a temporary paralysis, occurring per 1,000,000 doses of flu vaccine. We have not seen Guillain-Barré with COVID vaccine, but that can occur with flu vaccine as long as 6 weeks after the vaccine. Oral polio vaccine gave rarely some people a form of polio. Again, that tended to happen within weeks. The last one, which we don't really see much anymore, is a yellow fever vaccine, which can produce a very rare but deadly side effect weeks to days after getting it. This is the reason that the FDA moved the bar and said, okay, we typically see these in days to weeks. We're going to make it 6 weeks before manufacturers can bring their product for review. And then they moved it to 8 weeks to be out of an abundance of caution, because we really don't see new side effects after that time period. And true enough, we have not at this point seen anything that we can reliably point to. Now, let me make another point, and I know I'm speaking a little long here, but
That's okay.
When we, by chance alone, things happen to people, and by chance alone, they will happen at various time intervals from getting the vaccine. So how do we know whether the vaccine caused it? Well, in Rochester, Minnesota, for example, there's a very famous study that's gone on for 60 years now called the Rochester Epidemiology Project. So we know background rates. Let's take one that we're going to talk about, blood clots. We know exactly the background rate of blood clots, let's say 2 years ago, before there was anything called COVID. When we give the vaccine and we see people develop those things, we look and say, okay, we've got a group of people, tens of thousands to millions of people who got the vaccine. Is the rate of blood clots any different in that group than in the group who did not get the vaccine? And so we're able to give a judgment as to whether we're seeing more of a particular problem or less of a particular problem. Some of the vaccines lead to less problems. And so that's how we make that determination. In addition, there's tremendous, as you might imagine, there's such concern about this on everybody's part that there's tremendous amount of safety evaluation occurring. When you get your vaccine, I'm going to hold up my old phone here. You can sign up for a program called V-Safe, V as in Victor, V-Safe. And you can report any side effects you have for as long as, I think it's 6 weeks after your second dose. Anybody can go online and fill out a VAERS, V-A-E-R-S, a VAERS report, and report a side effect, whether it's in you, a friend, or a family member. You don't have to be a doctor or nurse to fill that out. And then there are a number of safety monitoring programs that the government uses, like looking at insurance databases. Are we seeing an excess of something? So, you know, if you got to have a new vaccine, it couldn't have come out at a time when we were better prepared to monitor safety than now.
I think I hear you saying a couple of things. Number one, for people who are, you know, wanting to wait a little bit and see if there are issues with the vaccine, we're now at a point where we can say with confidence that there don't appear to be serious side effects associated with either of the three that are authorized. Is that?
Yeah, I would say that's a very fair statement. We now have given somewhere north of 120 million doses of vaccine. Now, to put that into context, Jill, as of yesterday, 1 out of every 590 Americans has died of COVID. 1 out of 590. Just to put that in perspective, let's say a 747 jet held 400 people. That number is the equivalent of 26 747s falling out of the sky and killing everybody aboard every week for a year. That's how many deaths. 1 out of about 10 to 10.5 Americans has gotten infected with this virus. So you have to judge, like everything in life, well, could there be some unknown risk of the vaccine? And I would say nothing that we can see. I took it. My family has gotten it for those who are eligible. I talk with my patients about it. Well, what about the risk of not taking the vaccine? That's huge. That's a huge and present risk and danger that we can see. So are you going to take this risk, or are you going to take this risk? And that's how
for the vaccine, correct?
Yeah, for the vaccine.
I'm going to back you up just a second. You brought up blood clots. And the reason that we were talking about that is because one of the vaccines that is not yet authorized for use in the United States is made by AstraZeneca. And
Yes.
There have been concerns that people have developed blood clots after inoculation with this particular vaccine. And when we were talking about the Rochester project, I think the point that you were trying to make is that correlation doesn't equal causation.
Right.
That, when you are giving the shot in this quantity, that certain things are going to happen to people naturally. And just because they do, it doesn't mean the shot caused it. For example,
right.
If I tripped on my way out to the mailbox after getting the vaccine, that doesn't mean the vaccine caused it. It just means it happened.
Let me give you a very, very common example. About 20 to 25% of pregnancies end up in spontaneous miscarriage. We don't always know why it happens. It just very frequently does happen. Well, what do you think happens for a woman and her family when that miscarriage occurs a day, 3 days, 7 days, a week after getting that vaccine?
Yes.
She's going to assume that temporality was causality. So the only wise thing we can do is say, are we seeing any increased risk in women who are pregnant? The answer, mercifully, thus far is no. We're not seeing any increased risk. In fact, we're saving women's lives by getting them the vaccine. And a pleasant side effect, antibody has been found in the umbilical cord and in breast milk to protect that baby. So
I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
It's a win-win. That's a brand new finding this week.
Okay.
So let's go to do you want to go to the issue of blood clots then?
Well, I'd like to know if you are satisfied that particular issue has been addressed regarding the AstraZeneca vaccine.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
And let me just be very careful about this one so people understand. So the AstraZeneca vaccine is not being used in the US. Nobody in the US has gotten that vaccine unless they've been in a clinical trial, okay? So what do we know? We know that there were a number of countries where there were cases of blood clots in the legs or a blood clot going to the lung. And they've looked at the background rates, and in that instance, they do not seem to find a risk greater than the background rate. A second issue related to that has come up, an unusual type of clot called a central venous sinus thrombosis, basically a vein that drains blood from the brain. And they have seen what looks like an excess, a slight excess of cases, at least in Germany.
Okay.
So the question is this being caused by the vaccine, or is it a statistical fluke? We don't know yet. So when I say I'm not satisfied, what I mean by that is not that they're not doing due diligence. It's that we don't have enough data yet to be definitive. Okay. So at this point, I don't see that we have any evidence of an increased risk of leg vein clots or clots that go to the lungs. The issue of low platelets and clot in the brain is at this point an actively investigated issue, and I can't be definitive about that yet. Okay. We just don't have enough data.
Well, I think that this is good background information because I hear from a lot of people who are pressing to have AstraZeneca approved for use in the United States. And what I hear from you are reasons that we are doing our due diligence.
Exactly.
Confidence in the agencies who are doing this.
Exactly. And, I served as an outside expert on the FDA advisory committees in the past. I have full confidence in that. If anybody has watched those proceedings, they are open to the public. Anybody can watch them. when and if AstraZeneca comes up for evaluation in the FDA, which could happen in the April, May timeframe, maybe something like that, you will see the level of scrutiny that goes on and the statistical checking to see, is this different in different geographic regions? Is it different than the background rate? So that we'll have a clear answer.
Okay. Well, one last question before we go, and you've been really generous with your time. You work at one of the world's most respected, most prestigious medical centers that we're fortunate to have right here in Minnesota. Are your colleagues getting the vaccine? I know that you said you did and your family has.
Yeah.
But what about your colleagues?
You know what? The answer I'm going to give you is what we've observed nationwide, which is really interesting. About 98 to 99% of physicians, when offered the vaccine, take it. About 60% or so of allied health personnel, it varies a little bit by region, et cetera,
yes,
have taken it. So one thing which is interesting, it's by the way true for flu vaccine too, is that nurses and pharmacists and dietitians and respiratory technicians, et cetera, have more concerns about the vaccines than the doctors do themselves. Now, that's not born of scientific evidence, right? If there's anybody who reads the literature, it's the physicians who know the data as to whether something is safe or not before they take it themselves and their family members and the patients they care so much about. It has to do more with how people make decisions under conditions of uncertainty.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Poland. Great to talk with you, and I appreciate your willingness to share your expertise with us.
My pleasure, Jill. And if there's one thing I could say in conclusion, no person should be hesitant about raising their concerns about vaccines or wanting to find out, in my particular situation, doctor, help me to think through this kind of thing. Show me and explain to me the data. You can't take 2 hours with everybody or we wouldn't immunize hardly anybody. But, those are valid questions and concerns. Go to trusted places of information, not just anybody on the internet, but, Mayo Clinic, University of Minnesota, Cleveland Clinic, Duke, University of Chicago, any of those highly reputable medical centers on their websites are going to have credible and up-to-date scientific information.
All right. Well said. Thank you again. Great to talk with you.
My pleasure. Be safe.